Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rachel Haberman, and I am Skyward's Content Marketing Manager. I'm so pleased that you can join us for our webinar today inside the Content Marketing Continuum, and thank you very much for sparing an hour of your Valentine's Day to hang out with us. I have the pleasure to introduce you to two amazing marketers who are going to be talking about Skyward's most recent research project. We spent most of 2017 collecting information from just shy of 1,000 marketers from all over the world. The results of that survey went into a research report, which is what we're discussing today. So here to talk about that research, first of all, I would like to introduce Tricia Travaline, who is our Chief Marketing Officer here at Skyward. She is the one who oversaw this research project. And then we also partnered with Clare McDermott, who you may be familiar with from her work as Editor-in-Chief of Chief Content Officer magazine. She recently left that position to start a consultancy called Mantis Research, which helps brands produce original research. And we had the pleasure of being one of her first customers at Mantis Research. And she helped us analyze the research that we had gathered and ultimately publish the report, and so she'll be joining us to talk about the findings today. A few notes on our agenda today. First of all, Tricia is going to give you some background information on what the research project was in the first place. Then Claire and Tricia are going to spend most of the presentation talking about the most interesting findings from that research, and then finally we will open up the floor for Q&A, and you can use the chat box in the lower left-hand side of your screen. Last but not least, if you're interested in following along, you can use the hashtag #InsideTheCMC. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Tricia.
Thank you, Rachel. So in order to understand what the Content Marketing Continuum is and why we created it, you really have to know a little bit about who Skyward is. Many of you are very, very familiar with us, but for those of you who are new to Skyward, we are a content marketing platform and services company. Top brands such as IBM, ADP, Samsung, MasterCard, Anthem, and Colgate, to name a few, use our software, our freelance community of creatives and storytellers, and our services to create, manage, and distribute original content that connects with their audiences. And when the time is right, we work with our customers to apply storytelling craft to engage people in a way that inspires them to act. Now, the operative phase here is when the time is right. We have found, what we have found and what we have heard from speaking and working with literally hundreds of companies is that although most marketers feel they understand the why of storytelling, not everyone understands the how. And when I say how, I mean what it takes to transform their teams for sustained content publishing and eventually storytelling. So we created a framework specifically for our customers that mapped out the steps required to publish stories in a sustained way that connect with audiences and at the same time achieve business results. So the framework, when we looked at this, we really went way more in depth in looking just at the types of content that were being created. We took a deep dive, and it was over the course of about 6 months, into what we believe is required to truly transform an organization. So we looked at the organizational structure. So what skill sets are required within teams? Where does content sit within the organization? We looked at technology. So not just content marketing technology, but how does that technology interact with marketing and sales technologies in order to provide a singular view of content and its relationships with customers or specific audiences. We looked at systems and processes. So if compliance is an issue for a company, are there systems that adhere to compliance requirements? We looked at editorial review and SEO processes. marketing approach. So does the company create just product marketing? Do they take a campaign approach to their marketing? Are they doing sustained brand publishing? Are they applying storytelling to their marketing? We also looked at how they collect audience insights, how they define their audience, what they know about their audience. And are they taking what we call an audience-centric perspective on their marketing? We looked at the types of content that they were creating, and when I say types of content, I'm talking about everything from product literature all the way to full-featured movies. And we looked at the KPIs, so how do they understand their goals, how are they measuring them, and how are they continuing to refine these goals. So let's take a look at the continuum and the various stages within each. So here are the stages of the continuum, and as you can see, the first stage is bystander. So the bystander is focused on creating product content that promotes a sale or a transaction. But if you need to increase the awareness for your brand or drum up engagement or drive loyalty, you don't want to be a bystander. The next stage is novice, and novices are shifting their marketing focus beyond product marketing and sales enablement, and they're creating campaigns to generate demand. Their marketing is very ad heavy, and the downside to this approach really is that can be expensive. Campaigns are difficult to sustain in the long term, and I think as we all are feeling in marketing today, an ad-centric program is increasingly ineffective. Now the next stage is expert. And expert content marketers, they've always had an always-on, or they've added really, an always-on editorial strategy to their arsenal. And they've shifted their mindsets from creating content about their company, and this is so important, to an audience-first content strategy. And that's a content strategy that goes well beyond their product or service. You also start seeing changes in their team structures and see roles that are very similar to the roles that many of you who are attending today's webinar had. I was taking a look at the list of attendees, and there are titles such as user experience designer, editor, content strategist, content creator, and strategist. An example of a company who has really transformed their organization to the expert stage and even beyond is ADP. So what their ADP Spark program is focused primarily on HR professionals, and I was just reading an article, and the article was on how HR can use VR to create realistic experiences for on the job. Now, ADP does not create these VR experiences, but what they have done is they have turned the table, and this is content that is geared specifically to the needs of the HR audience. The expert also is building a publishing engine that streamlines workflow, and it also collects data and insights and funnels that data into the rest of their tech stock so that they can automate their performance, and that's critical. The next stage is leader, and I think leaders are pretty special, actually. The leader has defined their brand purpose, and that is they know what they stand for. And they've identified the audiences that share their values. And this is so key. So not only this audience shares their values, and then do they benefit? Who benefits from their products? Most importantly, from our perspective, they've mastered the art of storytelling as the most effective way to connect with their customers and also bring their brand purpose to life. And when you combine this with an always-on editorial strategy, it's a truly, I believe, powerful thing. Patagonia is a good example of a leader. They've taken a stand. They're stewards for the environment. Their customers share their value, and the stories that they tell bring their values to life. And the last stage is the visionary. with the visionary story is at the heart of their company, from the way management sets and communicates strategy to really how the product is developed, how it's marketed, how it's sold and delivered, and also to the way companies recruit their employees. There's a story, Jeff Bezos, when he meets with his management team. If one of the managers are trying to, sell a program or an idea, they have to put it in story form. He doesn't allow them to bring PowerPoint slides to these meetings. They have to tell the story of why this is important. And I think also, if you think of a visionary company in terms of content and storytelling, Lego has to be right up there. So those are the stages. And as I said, we use the Continuum to provide a framework of how we work with our customers to make sure that they put in place the necessary requirements to become master content marketers and storytellers. Then we decided, let's take a look beyond our customer base and gather information about where marketing teams in general would fall on the continuum. So we created a shorter assessment. And as Rachel said, over the past year, we've had more than 1,000 marketers take it. So here's the landing page. You're actually looking at the landing page for the assessment. So if you haven't taken it yet, don't leave us yet, but you can find it on skyward.com/CMC. And this is where the 1,000 respondents landed. So as you can see, the vast majority of the respondents are either in the novice or the expert stages, with 74% of those in those two stages. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of our customers are coming to us very much in the novice stage, realizing that they need to shift to sustainable content creation to be able to reach their audiences within the channels that they need to reach them. So as you can see, very few bystanders, which is, I believe that's really accurate of the market as a whole, but also very few visionaries. But more and more companies that I think are absolutely becoming expert in content marketing are moving to the leader stage. But before we jump into the findings of the research, we'd like to take a quick poll. Now, some of you have already taken the assessment. Many others haven't. So we thought it would be fun to take a minute and let you tell us where you think your organization would fall on the continuum based on the definitions that I've just outlined. So we'll show you the poll, and let's see if you can take that. So just pick where you believe your organization would fall. And we'll give you a few more seconds to fill this out. We're still seeing more. Okay, so let's skip to the results here. So what's really interesting is that the results that we found here of the people who are on the webinar are very reflective of the results that we found during the course of the year with the respondents who took this. It's great to see that 20% of you are, consider your organization's leader. I think that's amazing. 38, almost 40% of you are still in the novice stage. So I have a feeling that's why you're on the webinar today, to really learn how you can move from that novice stage to expert leader and even visionary. So with the assessment that we did, again, I said we had 1,000 people taking the assessment, and we realized that we had this treasure trove of data. And we wanted to analyze that to be able to find the trends and best practices that could help marketers in general continue to improve their content marketing efforts. And I hope if you've read this research that it has helped you as well. And we found the perfect partner for this. Clare McDermott, who is with us today, knows content marketing as much as anyone out there. She's the former editor-in-chief for Chief Content Officer magazine, and she recently launched her own market research company, Mantis Research. And with that, I'll hand it over to Claire to discuss the findings and the key insights that we gathered from the research. Claire?
Great, thanks, Tricia. I'm really happy to be here, and this was a really satisfying project to work on because you had a really nice big sample size, which is always necessary. And also, I liked how you set up the survey because it's not just a matter of benchmarking where you are relative to your peers on a number of different issues, but really building more of a roadmap of where you are and what are the steps that you need to take to get to the next level. So without further ado, let's get into these findings and see what these big themes were that we extracted from the research. So the first one is that storytelling isn't so much a tactic, but a mindset. And by that, we mean that, we're all showing up every day to publish ebooks, publish blogs, to, just one day after another get things done. And that's good. But really, we find that leaders and visionaries really have a sense of purpose that's much bigger than, what do I have to get done this week? And their content really is about sharing their organization's values and culture, and that's really such an important part of telling good stories. So let's look at the data and see that the survey asked, to what extent have individuals and teams across your organization adopted the craft of storytelling? And you can see here that visionaries answered yes. 83% of them said yes, that's true. For leaders, it was a little bit over half, and experts as little as 30%. And you can see here that the overall average was 27%. I was actually a little bit surprised by how low this is, and I think the phrase that probably tripped people up and that dampened a positive response on this question was across your organization. And I tend to think that that's possibly what's missing, that even if the marketing team knows the mission and knows the purpose, that it may not be shared across the organization. Tricia, would you agree with that? Do you feel the same way on that one?
Yeah, I absolutely do agree with that. And the other thing that we have found, I talked about this a little bit, is that we have heard the term story and storytelling for several years now, for a long time. It's in a way one of marketing's greatest buzzwords. But not many people really understand the craft of storytelling. And so, that's one of the reasons that we partnered with Robert McKee, who is really, the storytelling guru and best-selling author. I think Jonathan Cleese has taken his courses 3 times, and his students have won 60 Academy Awards and 200 Emmy Awards. So I think that's part of it, is that although we really, we talk about storytelling, marketers don't necessarily understand the craft, and they have to be taught the craft. And that is one of the reasons, why Tom, our CEO, and Robert are on the road with these storytelling seminars, teaching people the craft of storytelling, because it's not something that you can just say, oh, I'm a great storyteller. It's something that you have to learn, just as in any craft, like whether it's fine arts, any form of fine arts. You've got to learn and practice this.
And you perfectly teed up the next finding, which is about creativity requiring discipline. And I like the way you talked about craft, because I think storytelling is an art and it's a craft. And by craft meaning, what are the standards, the tools, the processes that you put in place to ensure that you can do this consistently. So let's look at some data here. The survey asked, again, do you agree with the statement? We use both brand standards and editorial guidelines for our content marketing program. Visionaries, nearly all of them say yes to both of those things. Leaders are at 70% and experts at 40%, and we can look that the average is about 31%. My hunch here is that most people are using brand standards. It's something that they're familiar with. It's pretty pretty, I would guess that most companies are doing that. Editorial guidelines, not as much. It's really a model from the media world. And just as a quick, for those who don't know what editorial guidelines are, it's really setting your strategic goals. Why are you publishing? Who are you talking to? Where are you going to find those people? As well as things like tone of voice, the topics that you want to address, even the policies that you have for publishing. And so we see, only 30% saying yes to doing both of those. And Tricia, is that your experience with Skyward customers that they're not so much using editorial guidelines? And do you think, I guess the bigger question is, do people understand what they are and the value of them?
Yes, and so I think part of what we do when we're working with our customers is we create those editorial guidelines with our customers as they're moving to an always-on editorial strategy. But one of the reasons I think there's a gap here, too, is that when we talk about brand standards, it obviously has everything to do with your brand strategy. And I think that even if you have editorial guidelines, it's really the leaders are the companies who are connecting that brand strategy to an always-on editorial strategy. So in Expert, you could have these pockets of innovation within your organization, and they have this really fabulous editorial strategy around a particular destination. But to move to that leader status, you've got to be able to connect your brand strategy. So what does your brand stand for? What is its purpose? Who is that audience that you're connecting with your brand? And then how does that always-on editorial strategy and how do those editorial guidelines support that overall brand strategy? And so to me, a big thing that's missing today is the connection between the two.
That's interesting. Yeah, I agree with that. And you can see here that editorial calendars are much more common, not surprisingly. Overall, 62% on average are using editorial calendars. And really, if you're publishing on a regular basis, it's almost hard not to use an editorial calendar, I'd say. But that is much more common, and I think much more understood about the value of the editorial calendar. So now when you look at these two graphics, it's important to understand that these are people who say, yes, we use editorial guidelines. So it's a subset of the whole. And on the left, you see essentially they're being asked, do you agree that your editorial guidelines address effective storytelling? Overall, 62% are saying, yes, that's true. And that's, to your earlier point, Tricia. And I think, I would say a key issue here is the larger the organization, the more places in which content is being generated, the more people involved from different divisions, different regions, the more important this is to have sort of an overarching vision of why you're doing what you're doing and the voice that you want to use with your audience. And a company that I think does this particularly well and is a very complex organization is Cleveland Clinic. They are phenomenal in terms of how they use editorial guidelines across many, many different contributors in many different areas of the organization. And then on the right, we see, do your editorial guidelines cover multiple content and media types? And that is much more common, and overall 80% say yes, that's true. And I want to insert here how important it is that these documents are not static documents. They're not things that you build once and you put away and perhaps show it to the new hire, but it's rather something that you're always updating, coming back to, and really using it as an exercise to think these things through, to kind of define what it is you're doing and why, and to update how you do your job. That is critical, and we're going to get into that in future slides of sort of the constant state of change among marketers and the need to revisit and be agile. So number 3, focusing on quantity or quality. The finding here is do both. And this one is maybe not controversial, but perhaps counterintuitive, because I think that marketers are recently, in the last year especially, there's such a big focus on quality, as well there should be. But really, quantity still is important. And so if we look at visionaries and leaders, they are simply doing more of everything, be it articles and videos and podcasts, be it sales-related content, advertising, serial or episodic content, and down at the bottom, movies, conferences, and concerts, those being obviously much less common. The one that I think interests me the most here is the serial content. It's such a huge opportunity for brands and not something people are doing a lot of. The example I point to with serial or episodic content is Intel. They do a fabulous job with this, and they've taken on really complex issues like AI and virtual reality and laid it out in a very consistent way. They tell those stories through many different forms, many different channels, and do a beautiful job making serial content. So Tricia, is there anything else you'd call out here?
Well, I think that what is really interesting, and as you say, you hear a lot of people saying don't focus on quantity, focus on quality. But what we're finding is the leaders and the visionaries are doing both. And I think it has to do with this idea that you are creating customer relationships versus focusing on transactions. And it depends upon how close you want that relationship to be. So if you want to be interacting with your audience on a daily basis, you need to have content out there, new content, refreshed content out there on a daily basis. If you want to interact with your audience once a month or once every 6 months, then that's when you have your new content. So in order to reach people via search and to have Google reward your content, you have to have new content out there. You have to be doing things differently. It's just if you want somebody to come back to you as a destination, to use you as a resource, to, as I say, interact with you daily, that's your role. Your role is now not just a marketer, but a publisher. And so you have to be there for them when they are looking for that content.
Yeah, that's so true. And just constantly experimenting. So let's move on to the next finding, number 4. Do you need help organizing your team? So do you want some sort of formula to apply to your own organization to know how to set up your team? And here there truly are no rules. And by that we mean, and looking at these 2 charts, we've segregated out just the leaders and visionaries and asked who is responsible for producing the majority of your content. And you can see here that they're really, truly, there's just no one way to do it. There's a lot of diversity in how it's done. Some people are calling on people throughout the organization to publish. Sometimes it's really focused in marketing. Sometimes it's, calling on freelancers. So, and I think the message here that's really important is that we're all operating under a set of constraints, right? So, our companies are organized in a certain way. We maybe have a global organization where there are content teams dispersed throughout different regions. There are different divisions. You may have different amounts of talent within the organization, even different technology. And so, when people ask me this question, really the answer is it kind of depends, right? It depends on what you have and what you're going for. So on the right hand, also, which group within your organization is primarily responsible for content strategy? Also a lot of different answers here, but obviously the top 2 are marketing and the content or creative team. And Tricia, do you find that, just anecdotally, is this something that people struggle with in terms of what's the best way to organize and staff their teams?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're finding that, some of them don't have the right skill sets in-house and are looking for the right skill sets, so they really have to transform, especially if you're in that novice and you've had very traditional roles and all of a sudden you have to be hiring editors and strategists and analysts and different skill sets. So they have to transform their teams. But I think what's really interesting, and this actually surprised me, because the idea that there are no rules in how you set this up is pretty interesting for the leaders and the visionaries. I do believe that the one rule that we are hearing from the marketplace in a big way is that they might have different people writing and creating the content, but the big rule is they need to connect their teams. And so they need to give senior management the visibility into what's happening, the visibility throughout the enterprise into what's happening with the content. They need to eliminate some of the silos that exist, just to try to streamline this. They have, these companies have advanced content marketing operations, advanced content operations that are fueling all of their channels, and they need to get more efficient at that. So that's a rule that we're hearing from the marketplace, and that's something that I think marketers at all levels are struggling with today.
That's interesting. The other thing I hear a lot of too is, when a company does hire a lot of outside talent and freelancers in particular, is how to ensure that those people, even if they are not traditionally employed by their organizations, that they understand the values, the culture, that somehow they are still a part of the team, even if they're not traditionally a part of the team. Do you find that too?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we find is that our services team oftentimes takes on that role to educate the freelancers and to make sure that they're really in tune with the brand. And so both our editorial team and our services team work really, really closely with our clients' freelancers to ensure that they are always up to speed. And we do that. I mean, our destination here for Skyward is the content standard, and I will put in a plug-in. Please do subscribe to the content standard if you want to know the latest and greatest on marketing and content marketing. But we spend a lot of time with our freelance contributors, and I think some of them are even on the call today, to make sure that they know what our strategy is, what is our market strategy is, how is our audience changing, all of that. What is our voice? And it's a huge responsibility, whether you're an internal team managing your content, whether you're managing internal subject matter experts, or whether you're managing freelancers.
Yeah, so true. And so finding 5, visionaries take an iterative, agile measurement approach. And by that, it's never more true than today that you really can't just kind of dial in your KPIs and decide this is how we're going to do things and sit back and watch success come to you, because it no longer works that way. And so what we're seeing here is that visionaries and leaders tend to focus more on strategic measurements, things like engagement and goal conversions, and sales attribution being like the holy grail that is so hard to do, but somehow 91% of visionaries and a little more than half of leaders have figured out how to do that. It's notoriously challenging. And the real head scratcher for me here is that, let me pull it up, 18% are not measuring at all. I don't know, that's pretty surprising to me. Tricia, do you think that's surprising?
Yes, absolutely. I think that to not be measuring your content in any way, it's like, that just goes against everything that we in marketers do today. So it's sort of like, it's just good content.
The thing that I do
Claire? We can't hear you right now. So I think we lost Claire.
Is it because
yeah. We are. So we just lost you there, Claire, for a little bit. So if you can repeat that question.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just saying that the thing that is really hard is to measure over time and to figure out why things are successful. Is it because of a new algorithm, or is it because you're doing something right? That is so true now more than ever. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of angst over all the algorithm changes and traffic going all over the place and really trying to figure out why that is. Is that true?
Yeah, that is so true. For instance, even now with, Google is about to come out with new algorithms around mobile, and, as soon as they do, these are things within the marketplace, whether it's Facebook or Google, when they change their policies or their algorithms, you don't have control over that as a marketer. So you have to be agile. You have to certainly be measuring things to know there's been a change, and to know that all of a sudden, oh my God, what happened to our search results here? Or why aren't we getting the same interaction we've been getting on Facebook? So I think that, first of all, you have to be constantly monitoring these, and then you have to be constantly agile enough to make changes, to respond to changes that are out of your control. But also, you have to be looking at things. So we tried this, if you're doing sort of 20% experimental with the content that you're creating, you continually try new things, experiment with different things, and if measure them. If they work, keep on doing them. If they don't work, don't be afraid to walk away from some things.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm seeing Erin in the comments saying, invite someone to talk about sales attribution. I think it's a great idea because it is such a hard thing to do. But so on this, what you just spoke about, Tricia, which is experimenting and iterating, let's get to our last finding, which is actually my favorite because it is so true. And I like to spread this message widely among stressed out marketers, and that is that pain really is universal. And when you look at visionaries compared to all others on these various issues, they tend to worry less about some things, not surprisingly perhaps, about things like resources and budget. But, they are challenged on many other of these issues at the same rate as everyone else. And I think that is a really nice way to end, in the sense that we as marketers really have to kind of make peace with discomfort. And if you're feeling discomfort, if you're feeling stress, that actually means that you're pushing, that you're learning, you're taking risks. And I think the moment when you feel secure, like I got this, I'm doing this just the right way, is perhaps a sign that you're not pushing hard enough. And it's a topic that I wrote about recently for the magazine, and that is, when you're managing teams, how do you keep that balance between wanting to support your team, wanting to inspire confidence, but at the same time really pushing people to that point of discomfort, and so that they can learn something new, so that your team can take on new ideas and new experiments. So Tricia, I don't know, have you made peace with discomfort?
No, I never make peace with discomfort. But I do want to share one story because I think people appreciate the angst that we feel. And that was, so as I said, we partnered with Robert McKee, who is a storytelling guru, and I am going to do another plug here. He and our founder, Tom Gerace, have the book Storynomics coming out in March that you can pre-order now. But that's my plug. So anyway, we had the unenviable task of creating emails for Storynomics with Robert McKee. And so here you're presenting these emails to him, and he is basically judging your emails and how well you're writing these and are you storifying your email. And we would go back and forth on these emails, and it never got heated with him, but he got heated with me, but I never really got heated with him. but I got exasperated, and I said to him, this is hard. Storytelling is hard. And he kind of paused on the phone, and he said, well, Tricia, what you have to remember is not every piece of content needs to be storified, but every piece of content needs to be part of a story. So that was truly an epiphany for me, because I realized that you've got to start with this story, and you have to understand that not every article or not every email has to be storified, but you better know where that email sits in the bigger story. So what role does that email play in your audience's story, in the customer's story? Where is it taking them? So that's one thing in terms of, it's hard. And so if you move into the leader or the visionary stage, the work doesn't get easier. It gets harder because you're challenging yourselves more. You're asking yourself to be great. I always say we're not looking for perfection, but we are looking for excellence. And that's what you have to move toward. And I think you even said this when we were talking earlier, Claire. You said that the balance is really how to still say, you want your team to come in and love their work and enjoy coming to work, but you never want them, and you mentioned it, you never want them to feel comfortable. You always want them to have a sense of discomfort, because that's how you move things forward. I'm going to quote Robert McKee again, and one of the things that he always says is, even though marketers love the term journey, he hates it. And he says life is not a journey, it's a struggle. And in marketing, I truly believe that the sooner we accept this, that marketing is not a journey, it's a struggle, the more likely that we'll be able to deal with the pressure that exists within it, because we accept the fact that this is a struggle and we're going to struggle to get better at it.
I think that's so true. And probably about 6 months ago, I had a conversation with someone who's a very well-known marketer and published a lot of books, and I won't say who it is, but he said to me, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I think that we all really have to understand that even those people who really seem like they know exactly what to do and are sharing their expertise with others, we're all really just trying to figure this out. So making peace with that is, I think, super important. So with that, those are our 6 findings. And Tricia, I'm going to turn this back to you.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, really the findings are storytelling isn't a tactic, but it's a mindset. Creativity needs discipline. Focus on quantity or quality. Well, the answer for that is you have to do both. Need help organizing your team? There are no rules, but it needs to be organized. And I think that's the most important part of that, and technology can organize it. Visionaries take an iterative, agile measurement approach. So there are going to be a lot of things that are out of your control, and you need to be agile enough to adapt to those, but you do need to measure. And in order to measure, you have to start by understanding what are the goals of your program? What are your business goals? What do you expect your content to achieve? Once you map that out, then you can come up with your KPIs. And last, and I think we've said enough on this, is pain is universal.
Thank you very much, Tricia. Thank you very much, Claire. We're going to use the remainder of our hour to do some Q&A. But before we get into that, I want to remind everybody that you can download the whole report and get many, many more beautiful data graphics like the ones you've seen today at bit.ly/inside the content marketing continuum. We've actually got a number of questions already in the chat box, but if you have more that you would like to add, please feel free. I'll get to as many as we have time for. So here's one that actually a couple of different people have had some version of, so I'm going to paraphrase here. People want to know what we are actually talking about when we say story, or that something is storified or part of a story. So can you elaborate on what that is?
Sure. And that's a great question. And so every story has a form, not a formula, but a form. And the first thing that you have to understand with story is that it starts with knowing your audience. And so you have to do a lot of research on your audience, and you have to know who the story is geared to. Just like when you're telling somebody a story, you need to know who's the audience for your story. Every story has to have a protagonist. So who is that protagonist within that story? The form is that if you think about this, the story starts with the protagonist. Their life is in balance. Something throws their life out of balance. Now, they'll take a series of actions to get their life back into balance and to reach their object of desire. Now, take that, put that into business terms. So, for instance, with Skyward, our brand purpose is to build connection in a disconnected world. So we're taking that protagonist from disconnected to connected. But we're going to tell a story that we're going to tell the story from our audience's perspective. How does that align with what we can provide the audience? So if you're thinking about, what's the difference between something storified, the difference would be that every piece, say that email had to have that story form. That email doesn't necessarily have to have that exact story form. But when somebody is writing that email to an audience, a member of that an audience, they have to understand what role does that email, what role is that email serving within the story of that audience member. So that email might just be moving that protagonist a little bit closer. Maybe that protagonist has already taken a couple of actions, and that purpose of that email is to move that protagonist just a little bit closer to that object of desire. And that's the difference, if that makes sense. Now, that's basically story form in 2 minutes. You can take an entire day, entire workshop from Robert McKee and Tom Gerace, a Storynomics workshop. You can find those under Storynomics. Just search for Storynomics. And that you really will understand. You'll come away, truly understand story form and the difference between the two.
Claire, is there anything you'd like to add?
I don't think I will add anything to that. I liked that, Tricia, and this is something that you guys really think deeply about, so I'll leave it at that.
All right, here's another question. I want to move up the content marketing continuum, but I don't have a ton of budget. Where should I spend first? What's my highest priority?
I'll throw that over to you, Claire, first, because I know that you've been working with a lot of different companies, a lot of different sizes, and then I'll take it from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, right? It's because especially when Tricia and I sit here and talk about great examples of this or great examples of that, and they're really big companies, that can be disheartening. I think the big difference maker is people, and all the other things that you invest in to do your content, whether it's technology, whether it's design, all those things, that they all matter so much. But to me, the most important ingredient is the people, and especially someone who knows how to write and how to publish in a way that really puts the audience first and is not trying to essentially, how do we kind of secretly place our message in this content, but rather what does the audience want from us and how can we satisfy them? How can we answer their questions? How can we inspire and help them? And if you can't afford a full-time person to be in that role, perhaps you can find that person on a freelance basis. But really, you're never going to get past the starting line if you don't have someone who is it's not really just about writing. It's about how to analyze, how to tell a story, how to present information in a way that people really have the time and ability to consume it. So for me, it just always comes down to people. Tricia?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then I think also is, start small. So it's the idea of what exactly are you trying to achieve with your content? What audience are you trying to reach? And be very, very specific. Perhaps you go after your most valuable audience first. And then what is the most, like how do they want to receive this content? So what is the most effective way to reach them, to communicate with them? And so I think once you define those three things, it becomes pretty clear with how you want to start your program.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. And starting small is important, not just if you have a limited budget, but if you don't have buy-in from senior leadership and maybe you want to prove that you can do this, but you don't have their support. They don't really understand what you're doing. Starting small is important there too. Maybe have one really successful experiment where you can say, this is what we're talking about. This is what we mean by content marketing. So yeah, I think it works in both of those respects.
Great. So we have time for one more question, and I'm going to choose a rather divisive one because I know people have strong opinions about this. Insights as to what a good length is for your content. Any takers?
Is this a super divisive one? I mean, yes, I think.
I didn't think that was that divisive.
I feel like the internet is yelling about it. Short form, long form, short form, long form. Maybe that's just the forums that I participate in.
Tricia, it's funny because when I was editor of the magazine, people would want to write and say, how long should it be? And I would say, as long as it takes, so I just think so much depends on what the topic is and how long it takes to air it out in a way that makes the most sense, and never, ever spending more words on a topic that doesn't require it. So, brevity is, to me, always important, but it depends so much on what you're writing about. And I would never, for example, say to an author, you have to stick to 400 words, you have to stick to 800 words, because it can't necessarily be done in that space. What do you think, Tricia?
Yeah, I also think it has everything to do with the type of content you're creating. So if you're creating a video, and what the purpose of the video is. So, if you look at the continuum, when you move up the continuum to expert and leader, it doesn't mean that you're not doing the content that you need to be doing in novice, the product type content, or even some campaigns. I think that the length of your content has everything to do with the channel in which you're distributing it, and the type, the content type. So if it is, say, an article that you're writing, we have found, we did studies with the Content Standard, and our audience told us that they wanted us to provide more in-depth coverage of some of the topics that we were covering. So, we asked our contributors to go from a 500-word article to a 1,500-word article, but only if it really was going truly in-depth with quality work. So again, if you have a video out there that you want people to look at and engage in, do you go beyond 3 minutes? Do you go beyond 1 minute for different types of content? It really depends on the purpose, the goal, and the role of the content.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I will say is that as important or more important is just how you begin. I can't tell you, as an editor, I can't tell you how many times I received articles in which I simply deleted the first paragraph because you've got such a limited amount of time to engage people and to get their attention. And as important as length is just ensuring you're not wasting their time up front with a kind of intro type model.
Yeah, and it's so funny when you think about story form, and one of the most important elements of story is that inciting incident. And so we always go back and forth when we're talking about creating articles or creating stories, and that is, do you start with the inciting incident just to draw people in, very similar to a novel type thing, or then do you leave the rest of that to backstory? So it is something I totally agree with you. Something has to capture your, especially in today's world, it has to capture the viewer or the reader's interest immediately in order to entice them to move on.
Right. I agree.
Thank you both so much. I do believe that it is time, at Tricia's behest, I have to tell you all, happy
Valentine's Day.
And thank you for
Skyward,
Valentine's. Thank you for joining us. And have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire.